Well, joining me now from Jerusalem is the Israeli parliamentarian who proposed the tax and land policy against the church, Knesset member Rachel Azaria from the centrist Kulanu Party. Thank you very much for joining us. Ma'am, given the backlash from the church and now the suspension of the plan, do you regret proposing it?
We have a special humanitarian situation in Jerusalem when thousands of people that lived in their apartments suddenly discovered their apartments don't belong to them, because the apartments were leased by the churches in the early 50s, right after the State of Israel was born. They were leased for 100 years and then another 100 years to an Israeli land company, which is a national company. Unfortunately, the churches sold for a very low price the land to private entrepreneurs, and these private entrepreneurs started going from home to home and demanding that people pay between 200 to 500,000 shekels, which is basically a quarter of the price of the apartment, just for the right to continue living in their apartments. We're usually talking about elderly people that can't move to old age homes because they can't sell their apartments, and they can't even have a lift in their building because they have no way to work with the banks on these issues. So this is an issue that we'll have to deal with. And since it has nothing to do with the churches whatsoever, it's only about land that was sold by the church, I am very, very sorry that this is what was been discussed. I know that there are people that have their own interest to create this international scandal. But at the end of the day, this is an issue that we will have to take care of.
Okay, but hold on. It has been suspended, and the Mayor Nir Barakat and Prime Minister Netanyahu will form a government committee to formulate a solution. So again, I don't understand where I've gone wrong here. You proposed a plan. You think it's for one thing. You say there's a backlash for other reasons. There is a backlash. It's suspended and there'll be a committee. So again, I ask you, given the backlash and given that the church has been so upset, and when we look at statements from the patriarchs of all the churches, Orthodox, Catholic, Coptic, Anglican, Armenian, Ethiopian, you name it, given all of that and the fact that it was suspended, I ask you again, do you regret tabling it?
No, I think that the major backlash has to do with the fact that the mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barakat, decided to freeze bank accounts that belong to the churches. I think that's a huge mistake. I think that is the reason that the churches started feeling uncomfortable. And then they wondered what's behind this legislation, this bill. But no, this bill has nothing to do with any land that belongs to the churches. Nothing to do with it. And I will repeat this again and again. I would be very happy that the land will continue belonging to the churches, because when that was the deal, people could safely live in their apartments. Unfortunately, the entrepreneurs that bought the land for very, very small sum are trying to earn a lot of money on the expense of these elderly people that live in the apartments. That is something that we can't allow that will happen. Now, we're working within the Israeli government on different solutions to this situation that has that has risen. And the Prime Minister, we're waiting with the legislation, but this legislation we will have to deal with. This is a humanitarian situation that we will have to deal with. On the other hand, the decision of Mayor Nir Barakat to freeze the bank accounts of the churches, that was a huge mistake, and I think you can ask him if he's upset about what he did. I can tell you that I met with ambassadors from many countries, and once I discussed with them the bill, everyone understands exactly what the situation is. Also amongst the churches, once we open the dialogue and start the dialogue, they realize it has nothing to do with the land that is owned by the churches. The State of Israel has no intention to change in any way any of the rights of the churches for land in Israel.
Rachel, when the church came out in a statement and they said that this was a systematic campaign against the churches and the Christian community in the Holy Land, they added that. They also said this breaches existing agreements regarding the status quo of the holy sites. And the church leaders had also told Haaretz that this would mortally harm the status of Christians in Israel. Do you believe that they are fundamentally wrong in interpreting it in this way?
I think that it's more complicated than the way it's being presented. I do think that that the churches in Jerusalem, there are several reasons that for the past few years they're feeling less and less even though I don't agree with it, I don't think it should happen, but I know that there are groups that are trying to make them feel less and less comfortable. So that's one issue. I also know that there was some land that was sold for very low price, a hotel that there's a very radical group that is trying to make some changes there, and I'm also working to make sure that won't happen. I think that the fact that these two events happen and then the freezing of the bank account, I think it got the churches very nervous. I truly believe, and I also know from working closely with different groups, once we start a dialogue, that they realize that this is an issue that has to be dealt with. Maybe the measures that this issue, the humanitarian issue, will be dealt with, maybe they will be slightly different, but we do need to deal with it. There's not, we can have this discussion and you can say the churches are very upset and, maybe we shouldn't have this bill, but as we're talking, we still have these thousands of families that might lose their homes. And this is something that we have to deal with. I mean, we can't just leave the situation and say, okay, we have this misunderstanding and therefore there's nothing we can do about it. This is something that has to be dealt with.
Okay.
There's no other choice.
And this is why we're having this conversation, to get to the bottom of it. Rachel Azaria, I thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, I do want to say that I think that once we get to the bottom of it, it is clear that these are a few issues that were put together, and I'm sure there are solutions for this humanitarian situation.
Understood. Thank you very much. Rachel Azaria joining us there from Jerusalem. Let's broaden this debate out now with our panel. I'm joined from Tel Aviv by Bar-Yoshafat. He's the Deputy Director of the Israeli think tank, the Kohelet Policy Forum. And in Amman, Jordan, Palestinian Christian Daoud Kuttab. He's a journalist and columnist for Al-Monitor. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Daoud, let me begin with you. Rachel Azaria, the member of the Knesset who tabled this legislation, told us very clearly this is not against Christians, this is not against the church. It's merely about thousands of people who will lose their homes, and the government, the authorities are trying to make sure that the church doesn't just sell its land to third parties that the government has no idea about. Isn't that accurate?
Well, there are two issues here. There are two issues that happen at the same time. There is the issue of the municipal taxation and there is the issue of the law. They all happen in the same time, and so the protest was on both issues. The land issue is a very controversial issue on different levels. On the level of the church selling what was leased land to business people, that has caused different kind of reactions from the Palestinian community, who felt that this was an unauthorized sale of land. And there is, as you said, there is the situation of Israelis who were living in some of these apartments, who felt that this might be used to create new housing complexes that will be sold for high amounts of money. The whole issue is very complicated, but the clear issue is that we have a government in Israel which likes to take decisions on its own. It doesn't like to share with people. It doesn't like to cooperate with people. It decides things. And they felt that the decision by Trump to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem has created the atmosphere that allows it to take on a small minority of Christian Palestinians and churches. And I think it has been a badly planned mistake that has boomeranged in their face.
Okay, so Bar-Yoshafat, would you agree that it has boomeranged because there has been the climb down in recent days?
So I personally oppose the bail proposition. I think it's a bad one because I don't think the government needs to interfere in people's businesses. Saying that, I think it's a joke that Palestinians are talking about Christians' right. In Israel, the Christian community has grown tremendously, while in Bethlehem it's almost disappeared. So I'm not sure it will boomerang, but I do hope that Israel will do better steps in reaching out for peace with our Christian friends all over the world. And again, as I said, I'm against the bill. I think it's not a good bill. I'm not against confiscating land if it's for a very important purpose, but not for giving it to individuals. Saying that, that's one topic. The other topic is taxation. For taxation, if someone needs to pay their taxes, then they need to pay their taxes. The permits that we're giving for different buildings not to pay taxes are if they're buildings for houses of prayer. And if it's not houses of prayer, then they should pay their taxes. saying that, still I think Israel should take diplomatic measures and trying to see how it can solve these diplomatic difficulties.
Ranbar, why'd you give the example of Bethlehem when Israel's in charge of it? You're the military occupier. So isn't any harm to the Christians there a reflection on whoever's running the place, which is Israel?
Strongly disagree. I, as an Israeli Jew, am not allowed to go to Bethlehem because I would be lynched. Right now, Bethlehem is under the Palestinian Authority. If you propose that Israel will annex and implement the Israeli law over Bethlehem, I think it'll be a great solution. I think the Christian community will grow there, and I think Jews will be able to visit a city that is also holy for us. But right now, all of territory A and B is under the Palestinian Authority. Same for Gaza. The Christian community in Gaza has almost disappeared, whereas the Christian community within Israel proper is growing. I don't really think anyone can argue that the minorities within Israel proper have any difficulties with rights. Members of the parliament, ministers, Supreme Court judge that sent our Jewish president to jail, they have full equal rights.
Okay, there was a creative, there was an interesting and creative sort of deflection from the fact of occupation. Nevertheless, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Daoud Kuttab, let us talk about this. Let me ask you if you believe that the churches overreacted a little bit here. Because in their statements, when they said this is a systematic campaign, it's an attempt to weaken the Christian presence in Jerusalem, and so forth, did they overreact to an issue about paying taxes?
Yeah, I think three things that happened at the same time that made what happened. The Orthodox bishop is accused of selling land to Israelis, and he needed to clean his name in front of the members of his own church. So I think that played into it. I think also the fact that the population in Jerusalem, whether Christians or Palestinians, are very upset with Donald Trump, and the anger is growing, and the Israelis are putting their hands and they are freezing the bank accounts of the churches. They had no choice but to take this drastic step. You are right, it was a big risk. They took a big risk, and they seem to have partially succeeded in lifting the suspension on their bank accounts.
Bar-Yoshafat, do you agree that that was a mistake? Because even MK Rachel Azaria said that the mayor of Jerusalem messed up by freezing the bank accounts of the church.
I say that even with taxation, even if someone needs to pay, I think just because we want to have good relations with the Christian world in general, and yes, I think Israel should, and that's what Israel is doing right now. It's creating a committee to see how they can solve this issue of taxation. If property is not being used for a house of prayer, but it's just owned by a Christian person, I don't think it needs to be any different if it's owned by a Jew or an atheist. It doesn't matter at all. The question is a very simple legal question. What was this structure used for?
Daoud Kuttab, very finally, is Israel's relationship with Christians in Jerusalem damaged?
I think it has been damaged for many years. I think we have had lots of problems because the Palestinian Christians are not they're first Palestinians. They are part of the Palestinian community, which is, by the way, under occupation, which is still considered the Geneva Conventions apply to it. So it's not a simple legal issue. It is an area under occupation. And their position, like the Muslims last summer, their position has to be taken care of. And you can't just make unilateral moves against people under occupation and expect them to accept your decisions.
Okay, let's see what happens with the committee that Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat and Prime Minister Netanyahu will form. Let's follow this closely. Gentlemen, it's been good to talk to you. I've got to move on. Bar-Yoshafat and Daoud Kuttab, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.